Brighter Media Group original.
Hey, it's John. Welcome to the Verse Podcast, a daily pursuit to become more perceptive to what the Bible says. We're going to be reading today from the book of Galatians, chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. Let's get into it. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Glad you're here. We break this into three sections. We have our verse of the day that we'll read in the middle. First, we build some historical context to the verse, a theological, biblical perspective to help us understand the context a little better. And then after we read the verse, we have a time of reflection and meditation and prayer, and then we are on our way. So let's not waste any more time. Let's dive into Galatians. Galatians was written by Paul, who was writing to the churches in southern Galatia. It's really important to note the close relationship he had to these churches. He helped start them on his first missionary journey to Asia Minor. It's why we see such a strong tone he took with them from the very beginning of this letter. It seems that because of his close ties to those churches, he was able to risk more to make sure that they were on the path of truth and not led off into deception. In fact, to emphasize the seriousness of his purpose, Paul took the pen from his scribe and wrote the end of the letter himself in large letters. So why did he write it? It's because he got a report that a group of people, those who sought to make living under the old Mosaic law, the pre-Jesus law, they sought to make that a requirement of the Christian faith. Those people had started to gain an influence in the churches. In the studies I've done, this specifically has been called the real first controversy that plagued the church. The relationship between Christian Jews and Christian non-Jews or Gentiles. This was not a minor issue for Paul. And he was really bringing the heat. Like, he was aggressive about unity and unity in Jesus, no matter their racial distinctions. And he pushed it as far as to call the Galatians deserters of Christ. People turning from the truth toward a gospel contrary to the one that they had received. Paul's authority, as you can understand, was undermined by these false preachers, and he spends the first two chapters defending himself, and then proceeds to get into the heart of issues in chapter 3. In today's reading, we're going to be zooming in on Paul dealing with the question of whether or not he's a people pleaser. He was being accused by these false teachers of offering things like an oversimplified faith, things that tickled the ears of people, and was being accused of it being cheap grace. In their view, it was lawless, because, again, they're coming from the perspective of the law of Moses, the Mosaic law. In their belief, it had no works tied to it, and that it was careless. It didn't make sense to them. Serious accusations that I'm sure we're not strangers to. I know I'm not. Let's see how Paul responded. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. I'll be reading from the NIV. I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. Yeah, so obviously he's super defensive, with good reason. The tone can even be off-putting, especially if you've dealt with pastors or teachers or leaders that have leveraged God and hearing from God to achieve their own selfish ends. I can see how that would make you uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable, to be honest with you. I'm not saying necessarily that I believe that, but I can understand the criticism for sure. I also understand that, we don't have the full context of what's going on here, and I don't even fully understand. These are just, honestly, my natural reaction, my honest thoughts, the questions I have in the margins. But here's what I do love, and I love about Paul, is that he really reflects a godly practicality, and it's this practicality that holds to the gospel without unnecessarily offending someone. It's leaning on truth and leaning on Jesus, not what others say or what others think. I think that's a healthy principle to follow. I think that could guide each and every one of us. I think it could guide our churches and should. What we must be focused on, however, is not watering down the gospel in an effort to reach other people. And so I think this could be our point of reflection today and prayer. Let's think about what it means to have a godly practicality. In verse 10 specifically, which says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God, or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Let's reflect on that. Reflect on the question, are we trying to win the approval of people or of God? If there's a little squirm in your seat, in the back of your mind, that's a good thing. It's a good place to be. It means we're being challenged and pushed. And I may not enjoy it. It may not be roses and butterflies, but I love the growth. And hey, I'm glad that you've spent some time and live in that space as well. Thank you for listening to the podcast today. I want to direct you towards the show notes that has everything you need to know about the podcast and to connect with the podcast, a place for you to submit questions that you have about the Bible. You want to dive deeper on an episode like this one, you let me know. Everything you need to know is in the show notes, or you can text the word verse to 88474. Hope to connect with you soon. Thank you for being here. I encourage you to leave a rating and a review and help create context for others if they come across the podcast as well. Have a great rest of your day. Keep making hope louder.